In this episode, a car crashes through a safety barrier and dangles precariously on a cliff ledge. One of the passengers plummets into the sea below, only to be devoured by a pack of 14 hungry sharks. Moments later, the car tumbles downwards. Will the remaining passengers meet the same ferocious end? Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is one of the most terrifying and unique shark attack stories you'll ever hear. Welcome to Final Affliction. It was 1967 in Sydney, Australia. Some friends were heading out for the day. They were a group of 3 adults and 1 child. They climbed into the car, chatting happily as they made their way along Australia's coastline. They drove through Sydney's picturesque eastern suburb of Dover Heights. The road wound along the cliff tops. On this particular day, however, the visibility was poor. The autumn fog had rolled in off the sea, enveloping the coast and the city in a blanket of white. As the car motored along, the child in the back seat began acting up. He had dropped something on the floor and couldn't reach it. In an attempt to calm the child down, the driver tried to reach into the footwell behind him and find the toy. He took his eyes off the road for a second. It was a second that proved fatal. He misjudged his speed at the oncoming corner and veered to the other side of the road. He slammed on his brakes, but it was too late. The car crashed through the safety barrier. The passengers screamed as the car flew through the air for a few seconds before tumbling down the cliff. But it didn't topple into the sea, not straight away. It became caught on some rocks sticking out from the cliff edge. The rocks held the car in a terrifying vertical position. The sudden halt on the rocks sent everyone flying forwards in their seats. The front passenger hurtled forwards. She smashed through the windscreen and fell to the water 100 feet below. Only seconds later did she hit the cold, hard surface of the ocean. She lay still, lifeless on top of the water. Within moments, there were shadowy shapes making a beeline for the woman in the water. They converged from all directions, drawn by the loud splash, drawn by the scent of blood. There was a frenzied attack on the woman's body. Eyewitnesses reported seeing 14 sharks thrashing around in the water as the car hung precariously on the cliff above. If the passenger hadn't died on impact, she was torn to shreds in seconds by the sharks below. The driver could see the commotion in the water. He could see the ocean bubble and boil, turning red as the woman disappeared from sight. He cried out and tried to look behind him to see if the others were alive in the back of the car. The seatbelt bit into his chest. He couldn't loosen it. He couldn't free himself. It was holding him firm, but he needed some slack in order to move. He heard the car creak and groan under the strain. Every time he made the slightest movement, the car rocked and swayed. It was hanging on by inches. When the driver glanced over his shoulder, he could see the child and the other passenger were not moving. He tried to reach them, desperately trying to wake them, but they didn't respond. He didn't know what to do. If he somehow managed to climb out of the car, he was still stuck on a sheer cliff 100 feet above the sea. People rushed to the cliff top. As the car hung there, emergency services were called. The man had hit his head badly on the steering wheel. His vision was blurry and his head was oozing blood. He could feel it throbbing. The pounding of his heart sounded in his ears. Terror gripped him as he prayed for a miracle. But after 30 minutes, clinging onto the edge of the cliff, the rocks finally gave way. The car and the driver were sent flying. The car crashed downwards, somersaulting down the cliff. It smashed into the water below and bobbed there for a few minutes. The man felt the rush of water entering the vehicle. He desperately pulled at his seatbelt, but it wouldn't unclip. As the water kept rising, he panicked more and more. He felt it creep up over his feet and onto his lap. He was now sitting in waist-high water. Then something swept past his side, just outside the window. A dark gray fin sliced through the water. Then another and another. The man was surrounded. The sharks had gotten a taste for human flesh and they were hungry for more. Frantically, the man tugged at the seatbelt. Eventually, he was able to ease the tension and unclip it. The car was now half submerged. There was no way out except to dive under the water and swim out through the half-smashed windscreen. But he knew what was down there. The thought shook him to his core. He knew the second he exited the car, he would likely be devoured. He heard thrashing and splashing around him. He wheeled around. The sharks were trying to get through the smashed back windows. They were trying to get to the two passengers in the back seats. He had to get out of there. He had to act fast. He took one deep breath near the roof of the car and dived underwater. The blurry, shadowy figures of the sharks came into view as they swam past the open windscreen. He watched as they swam from left to right and back again, circling the vehicle, looking for a way in. When he could see no sharks in front of him, he chose this moment to go for it. He pushed off the driver's seat with his feet and swam through the smashed windscreen. The blood from the gaping wound on his head flowed into the water. The scent enticed the sharks. They homed in on the injured prey. When he surfaced, he scrambled onto the roof of the car. It was barely above water now. It was wet and slippery, but he clung on, hauling himself onto the steel top. He steadied himself there for a moment, breathing heavily. Blood dripped into his eyes. He wiped it away and looked at the shore. It was tantalizingly close. All around him, dorsal fins broke through the surface of the water. They were having a feeding frenzy. They had found their way into the car now and had made their way into the back seats. As the car gurgled and rocked and the tail fins of the sharks thrashed and splashed, the man knew he had to make a break for it. In just seconds, he knew the car would be at the bottom of the harbor and he would be eaten. Summoning all the courage he could muster, he dived from the roof of the car towards the shoreline. It was only feet away. He knew the sharks would be on him instantly. He hurtled through the water, kicking his legs frantically, pulling himself through the water with his arms, inching closer and closer to the shore. It felt like an eternity. His lungs felt like they were going to burst. His muscles burned. He was convinced with every second that passed that he would be attacked. He was sure he would suddenly feel a sharp bite as one of the sharks grabbed him and shook him around briefly. But miraculously, he made it to shore. He grabbed hold of the rocks and scrambled onto dry land. When he made it, he looked around just in time to see the car sink. The swirling and the bubbling of the water was all that was left as it swallowed the car. The thrashing and splashing of the sharks continued for some time as they followed the car downwards. When emergency services reached the man, he was taken to hospital. He had a serious head and neck injury and was also treated for shock. But luckily, he went on to make a full recovery. He lost his friends that day in a tragic and terrifying event that would haunt him for the rest of his days. There had been a lot of reported shark attacks in Sydney Harbor and its surrounding beaches over the decades. The exact species of shark involved was never identified and remains unknown, although marine biologists theorize that this might be the work of the bull shark since they occasionally hunt in groups called schools. What we must remember is that the moment we step into the water, we are in their domain, not ours, and at any moment we might just meet our untimely, final affliction.